all week we have been walking you through the various components of this tool. And today we are going to jump into equitable pedagogy. So please change that slide over. All right, so we are looking at some objectives to begin with. So first and foremost, we want to familiarize ourselves with what equitable pedagogy actually is. I will walk you through some specific do's and don'ts of equitable pedagogy that relate to NTI. And hopefully we can leave with some strategies that make sure that we are finding ways for all of our students to be successful. So let's keep moving. All right. So if you have joined us all week, this should be rather similar. And so we know that this NTI is the right now normal. And there are so many really positive components to it. But when we really do stop to think of how we are doing it, especially in JCPS, we know that there are some issues with equity. But I actually want to encourage those of you who are here today to hop into that chat box and discuss ways in which NTI might actually solve or positively address some of these equity issues. So I'm going to give you a few moments to respond there. And I've got my lovely teammates in the chat box who can help field some of those comments as well. We realized where there were issues of access across the district, and the response was to redistribute Chromebooks into homes so that we can provide that digital connection from home. And I am seeing some folks making mention that not only are we starting to realize the specificity around those gaps, but now we are learning ways in which to fill them with tech. Obviously, that's not the only answer, but with NTI, it's one place to start. I'm seeing some folks in the chat saying that students are comfortable in various environments, and if home happens to be one of those places, then learning in that environment may very well change for those kids. Flexibility is one of the major components coming out of NTI here as well. So we are looking at how we meet the needs of everybody. We're putting on our teacher thinking caps and wrapping our minds and hearts around this. I'm going to continue to let my team respond in the chat, and we're going to keep going. So Kenita, if you would please switch the slide. All right. And on this note, and the chat box really is showing me that we are in the right mindset here. We've got, before we do anything with NTI, we've got to recognize that it is a balancing act. So we want our instruction, whether it's online or offline, to be responsive, to be engaging, to be meaningful and relevant. And we've got to balance all of that with our acknowledgement that our kids are going through a myriad of experiences with quarantine and with COVID. And for a lot, it may spell trauma or job loss, stress, anxiety. So I think that this message is loud and clear, but we need to keep shouting it, that we've got to put humanity first. And then we move from there. So Kenita, I think the next slide does a great job. This comes out of our team, specifically Abe and Cook designed this, where if you've been here throughout the week, you've seen this graphic. It's a way for you to realize that while we all are going through this pandemic together, the way that we experience it is vastly different. So this graphic hopefully gives you just more insight into that and fosters that sense of humility that we need to have in order to approach NTI. So I'll let that kind of hang for just a moment. If you've got any comments, responses to this, please put it in the chat. And let's keep moving, Kenita. So this is the one-pager that holds all of the components of the NTI-R tool that we've designed. Again, we're looking specifically at equitable pedagogy. And that descriptor is on the following slide. So let's display that, please. So the question that came out of that previous slide, that checklist, it is encouraging teachers and the PLCs with whom they plan to ask, Are you modifying your strategies, your resources, and your methods to facilitate academic achievement of our underrepresented societal groups? So what is that really getting at? What are we trying to help you understand? So we pulled out some language from the larger ARE tool, and you'll see it on the following 3 slides. If we can move on to the next one. The first thing we want people who are designing NTI instruction to think about is, what are we doing to personalize instruction, but also what are we doing to make sure that it is rigorous and that we are scaffolding our support? So we, of course, want our teachers to call upon what they already know about their kids to make an informed instructional decision. And thinking about what we know about our kids, that means that we cannot assume that what works well for one student works well for another. So that requires finesse, it requires observational skills, it requires us to really know who our kiddos are. And that lends itself to flexibility. We've got to be flexible in our thinking, in our planning, in the assignments we provide, considering that we're providing both online and offline assignments. What can we do to be flexible? What can we do to provide options? And with that, no matter what types of learners we have, where they're coming from, how they're approaching NTI, we cannot assume that any of our children have the same preference for tasks or for the products they want to create. And then finally, culture is an enormous resource. If we're not using that to inform the choices we make, then we've got to. That's an enormous opportunity to not just know our kids, but to know how their brains are wired. And so we can't assume that just because you learn a certain way that your kids prefer that as well.
That's one of the things I try to focus on, the positives that are going to come out of this, and the fact that so many teachers are getting comfortable by creating choice boards and choice lessons. I think is going to carry over once we are back in school. And I've had people already say, a PE teacher the other day say, when I go back, I'm not going to have every kid doing the same thing. They're going to have choices. So I think that's great.
And this has certainly revealed the necessity of choice. And so you're absolutely right. When we do go back, I hope it's not normal. I hope it's not what it used to be. I hope that we learn from this, that kids are an enormous asset in the classroom, and we have to maximize on what they are bringing to us. It cannot revolve around our choices and our preferences. We've got to put that in our kids' hands. All right, thank you. Kanita, next slide, please. All right, so some more do's and don'ts here. We are thinking of equitable pedagogy in terms of how we make our decisions. And of course, we want our decisions to be helpful for our students. We don't want to harm them. So of course, that power of observation is big here. And again, making those informed decisions should be based on our observations. And this is a huge one during NTI. We cannot assume that our kids all have the exact same resources, the exact amount of time, the same types of supports, or just availability of being able to use a computer. So our timeline cannot be forced upon our students. And so that does lend itself well to the expectations that we hold, and that requires enormous flexibility. And when we do have assignments returned to us, it's our job to provide not just feedback, but effective feedback. Good job says nothing. It doesn't tell a student where they're excelling, and it doesn't tell them ways in which they need to be making improvements. So then in the don't column, we can't hold expectations that are unfair, unreasonable, irrelevant to the individual. Let's move forward. All right. Last set of looking at equitable pedagogy specifically through the NTI lens. We've used these words frequently, and they're huge right now, of course. Compassion and flexibility, we should be always thinking that way, no matter what the setting is. But during NTI, that's got to drive the choices we make. We've got to be able to find ways in which to commit ourselves to each child's success in a way that shows compassion. It acknowledges where they are in that storm. When you have time to study that graphic, if you pull this link, you'll see all the different things that may be a sprinkle in one kid's life and an absolute deluge in another. So back to that timeline, we can't assume that every child has time for your assignments on your timeline. Knowing who they are, knowing what they're experiencing allows us to demonstrate that compassion and that flexibility. And similarly, due dates as a hard timeline for accepting completed work just doesn't work. There are so many different things that our students are experiencing, and showing the compassion to accept work and provide feedback, that's what needs to happen. And finally, we should be creating safety nets for our kids that don't punish failure. Failure should be information. It should be a data point. It should allow us to then go on and support the child in overcoming said failure and giving them the supports that they need to be able to succeed. Failure can be a means of reflection. It can be a means of goal setting. And our feedback should lead our students to be reflective. It should lead them to set different goals. And so when we fail to provide that, then our student is left with a lot of questions and feeling perhaps that they're not supported. All right. So, Kanita, keep us moving, please. All right. So I'm going to turn it over to the chat again. I've given you some pointers, but also some things to avoid. I want to know what types of positive impacts that equitable pedagogy can have on our instructional choices, the culture we establish with our students, and on their success. What can equitable pedagogy do for us when we begin to sort of rethink our approach? So I'm going to keep an eye on the chat and see what my teammates are sharing as well. This whole new approach is forcing us to make improvements to our teaching, because things are being brought to the forefront and we have to grapple with them. We have to make choices around them now. Nairi says it really well. There's no such thing as a failure. It's just another opportunity for learning, improving, and growing. It should not be a punitive thing. It should not be a period at the end of a sentence. It should be a comma along the way.
Yeah, there's like from the time you say it till when it's live on YouTube, it's almost like 30 seconds to a minute sometimes. So
that's okay. That's all right. Another comment in there where when we provide effective feedback, when we show compassion, when we demonstrate that we are flexible, then our students will come with a deeper feeling of trust. It forms that relationship that is critical in the classroom, K-12 and beyond. And then we are opening ourselves up to stronger relationships with stakeholders, whether that's other teachers or our students, their families and caregivers, the surrounding neighborhoods and communities. That's critical. I want to bring it back to the graphic that we saw at the beginning. We are all in this same storm, but we are not in the same boat. And if we are to extend that metaphor, we think about what something as simple as a rowboat might have equipped on it versus maybe a step up and it's a fishing boat, or you look at a yacht or a cruise liner and you start comparing what they have and what they don't have. So many of our families and their kids are equipped with very little up to quite a bit. And no matter what, we do need to consider the variety of experiences that our students are having. So we've got to acknowledge the very real potential for job loss. Parents are bringing home the stress of maybe losing their job or just not knowing. A lot of our kids come to school and have consistent access to mental health care. And I know our counselors are doing their best to make themselves available, but with limited or restrained access to mental health care, we have to remember that. And something I've read that really struck me, because I have a kiddo at home, she's 6, and quite often what they're thinking and feeling doesn't manifest in a reaction that necessarily matches the feeling. So sometimes our kids don't know how to express what's going on inside, and it shows up in a variety of different ways. Doesn't matter. we owe it to every single one of our students to be flexible, to provide them grace, and to ensure that what we are providing in this time is work that is meaningful, work that is relevant. And I do encourage you to tune in tomorrow. Shashrey has some really excellent ideas and resources for how we can even bring the learning home here to Louisville. And I don't want to give away her content, but she's got some really cool things that she wants to share with you. So I want to leave a few moments for any extra lingering questions to pop up in the chat, but if you move on to that last slide for me, please, or second to last one. So I want to leave you with one more resource, and then I'll share with you where I pulled some of my ideas. Our team in developing the R-Tool checklist, within Equitable Pedagogy, we realized that there are going to be plenty of people who may want to make sure that they are checking their work. And so we developed a checklist that helps you examine what you're putting in front of kids and make sure that it is in fact equitable. As we continue to share and find good resources and see good work that's going out there, we use our hashtag ARERUJCPS. And that's also a great way to comb through what people have posted in the past several months and maybe get inspiration that way. So, Kanita, if you leave it on that last slide with your zone contact, I'm going to head back to the chat and see if there's anything else lingering.
This is just another way that we can be very, very intentional about the work that we are doing to move racial equity forward. We just don't want to put a whole bunch of resources in your hands. We want to be able to have those resources, to be able to have some foundation, to be able to be rooted to some sustainable practices, as well as to keep us mindful of just the small steps that we can do to really support our learners and families during NTI. So similar to the larger NTI R-Tool resource, we've structured this as a checklist as well, again, just for ease of access, to support those practices, to support our learners. So some things to consider is like, have you structured academic and social interactions between students for all students? So via technology, phone, snail mail. So are you connecting to your community of learners? Are they able to connect to each other? And of course, if this is something that you have not thought about, or you thought about somewhat, within the NTI one-pager itself, we have resources embedded within it. And then again, you can always contact any of us from Zone 1, Zone 2, Zone 3, AS Elementary, Middle, or High School.